The Reconnect, the Disconnect group, and it's presented by Arlene Etchen, Senior Research Consultant, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and Susan Spiegel, a principal of Susan Spiegel Architect, Inc., as well as a faculty member at the Institute Without Boundaries in the School of Design at George Brown College.
Hi, everybody. We just wanted to say we love Luigi's presentation, and it's completely the opposite of ours. It's an ideal visionary world, and ours is nitty-gritty grassroots. So get ready for a mind change. This is Arlene, and I'm Susan, by the way.
Thanks, Susan. And thank you, Edward, for really setting up our presentation really well. After the Second World War, the inner suburbs of Metro Toronto started to really take shape. And these neighborhoods were planned with clear direction, offering a mix of housing, parks, and shops. And they were designed for middle-class families with cars. But fast forward to 2012, and parts of the inner suburbs have taken on a very different form. Dilapidated apartment buildings, underutilized strip malls, and limited access to transit. Over time, these areas have been settled by poorer families who often struggle to afford a car and are very dependent on transportation, yet find themselves in neighborhoods where transportation services are still greatly underdeveloped. Many of the edges of the inner suburbs have become disconnected from what the city has to offer. They're isolated. So the question is, how can we connect isolated neighborhoods through accessible transit networks? Our team's name is Reconnect the Disconnect, and we were asked to focus on the Kingston Galloway area. It's a priority neighborhood in the former city of Scarborough that has limited access to jobs, social services, and transportation. People in this community tend to be low income and rely on the transit system. They're disconnected. Our overall project challenge was to reimagine Kingston Galloway as an integral, connected neighborhood with adequate transportation systems. Our team decided that our plan would be to reconnect this disconnect and mobilize the community for change. When we started getting into the project a little bit more, we realized we kind of had to expand what the mission was. It wasn't just about transit solutions. We needed to come up with a complete connected community, inclusive, engaged, and informed, with tools to transform lives by working together, reconnecting the disconnect, residents to each other, and Kingston Galloway to the city. We needed to make this community self-sufficient. So as the title of tonight's session of Land Use suggests, not all of our solutions revolve around transit, but actually involve changes to the existing use of land to much better meet the needs of the community.
From the early 1900s to 1950, when the 401 was built, Kingston Road was the major route in and out of Toronto. Kingston Road, Highway 2, the King's Highway. It has never lost its primary usage as a conduit between places. These images represent some of the vastly different contexts of the KGO. KGO has no historic downtown like Main Street in Markham or Unionville. Kingston Road is an arterial roadway of 6 lanes plus a turning lane, and Lawrence has 7 lanes. And it's an experience of take your life into your hands to walk across the street. And traffic is rarely congested for the lack of car ownership. So the traffic's moving very quickly. The commercial component is composed of strip malls with vast parking lots with a high concentration of social housing looming in the background. But to its credit, it's a vibrant new immigrant population with a lot of ma and pa retail and cafe business starts rather than big box stores, thank goodness. There's a lot of authentic life in Scarborough East. They're surrounded by jewels of nature, the Highland Creek Ravine to the north and Scarborough Bluffs to the south. And in a recent article by Adam Giambroni in Now magazine, he states that Scarborough has everything in it: nature, multiculturalism, and good food. And it is set to become a leading cultural force in the GTA, and we agree. The Kingston Galloway area is located 12 kilometers from Toronto. It's not a well-known inner-city suburb. In fact, I'm really surprised that anybody knew anything about it, but since Ed grew up there, he gave us our little intro. When we first received our challenge, we weren't even exactly sure where it was or what the boundaries of it were. And you can see from the slide that the LRT doesn't even reach Kingston Galloway. For the purposes of our challenge, we felt that this isolated inner city suburb had little to recommend it from social services and transportation point of view. So we extended the formal boundaries to take in the wide swath of nature all around it. And although the GO transit line goes through the KGO and stops at Guildwood, as we look further into the demographics of the KGO proper, we will see that taking a $10.80 round trip from KGO to Union Station is prohibitive. Food or go? This should not have to be a choice, but it often is. In terms of a more local context, there are 3 bus lines that serve this area, 2 east-west and 1 north-south. It takes 12 minutes to do a car ride to go shopping, but if you're on public transit, it's an hour and a half, 3 buses, and 2 transfers. The recent Martin Prosperi Institute report says their conclusion to areas like this is to call them transit deserts. And the report says it's not massive new networks of subways or fancy European light rail transit that will fix this, but what will? When we began this project, David Miller's Transit City just got canceled. So our initial proposal called for its reinstatement, though it became clear that the community, both the upper classes and lower classes, had no support of it. This is the new plan that's been put forward, and though it's better than no transit city, it doesn't deal with a 40-minute bus trip to travel 5 kilometers in the KGO area. If you live in Markham, which is directly north of Scarborough East, and you have poor transit, which you do, you just go home and take one of your 2.5 cars per household and your mobile. Or if you take local transit, it has Wi-Fi on it, so you can have your business on the bus as you take forever to go from spot to spot. But in East Scarborough, there's 0.5 cars per household, and there are no car share programs. Downtown Toronto with frequent transit and East Scarborough with almost no transit have almost the same percentage of car ownership. But in downtown Toronto, we have a density in a public transportation infrastructure system that allows people to opt out of owning a car. In the KGO, by contrast, there are few cars and inadequate alternatives. The social challenges facing the KGO. It's one of the highest concentrations of social housing in the GTA. It is the largest percentage of single-parent families. There's lack of services for a high immigration and a very large Aboriginal population. There's a high crime rate, lowest per capita income in the GTA, fewest cars per household. Lack of access to transit reduces all of life's possibilities. In terms of the physical challenges, wide roads, as we said, of 6 to 7 lanes with very fast-moving traffic, massive networks of chain-link fence around social housing compounds that make a 5-minute walk to a play area 20 minutes. Narrow and even sidewalks with no pedestrian support or respite, poor infrastructure maintenance on all seasons, vast commercial parking lots that encroach into the potential public realm, unreliable bus service, and poor lighting. I was on a Skype call with urban planners in Dublin this week because the IWB is working with them this year. And it was wonderful to see how many public realm experts were around the table and how seriously they take themselves. And I know that we do have a public realm department. I think I know we do. It's called City Clean and Beautiful. It has no level of seriousness compared to what's happening in European cities. And they value pedestrian over vehicular traffic and know that strategies, very small, can change the experience of all users in the public realm. Any land use that allows wide, fast roads, poor pedestrian sidewalk real estate, underused lands of parking lots, and has serious requirements for change and fast change. To that point, we established strategies to meet these challenges, the social and physical through time in short, medium, and long, to begin to change things quickly without any city policies required, because that takes a long time. The medium and the longer goals, once we get the short term up and running, will address land use changes. And if all this sounds rather grim, there is a silver lining of positive community innovation in East Scarborough in the form of East Scarborough Storefront.
The East Scarborough Storefront works to improve the lives of communities in Kingston Galloway's residents. by offering a one-stop shop hub where 40 partner agencies deliver services under one roof. It's a community center, it's a meeting center, it's a training center. It's a place where people can be educated, people from new Canadians to at-risk youth. And because of the community outreach and their community outreach efforts and their influence, they're in a very good position to affect change. So as a result, you'll see that a lot of the solutions that we propose revolve around the East Scarborough storefront. An important thing to note is that this storefront's model for Community Hub has been so successful in that community that other priority neighborhoods are using their model and developing them in 8 priority neighborhoods in Toronto. So our team came up with a number of solutions for reconnecting Kingston Galloway. Our theory of change was to have a number of interventions, a number of them grassroots based, that when pulled together have great results. And as I mentioned earlier, while there were a number of recommendations around transit, many of the interventions revolved around community building. So in the short term, we looked at things that would make it easier to walk around. So for instance, at the top left, you can see someone taking down a fence. This is one of our precedents. It's the downtown defencing project in Toronto that sort of inspired us. This nonprofit group will go to any willing homeowner and take down their fence. Now, in Kingston Galloway, we're looking at bigger fences than this, but we know it can happen. So to improve walkability and safety in the community, we looked at removing fences, adding in wayfinding, and improving lighting. We also know that we needed to improve the public realm in the community, and that would be by adding pop-up markets and doing more activities in the public realm. Now, there is an existing farmers market, and we wouldn't want to take away from that. We'd want to enhance that, maybe do more of them. And there are also events in run through the East Scarborough storefront, where we kind of recommend, why don't we take over some of the underutilized parking spaces in the strip malls? And finally, our short-term recommendations around transit are to form a transit user group. You'll see that throughout our recommendations, this is a really important element of it. Also in the short term, we would start laying the groundwork for a shuttle. When we spoke with some of the stakeholders in the neighborhood, we found that that was their #1 request for transit. They were able to get out of the city, not very easily, not very quickly, but they really wanted to connect with their community, with their neighbors. So our recommendation would be to start maybe doing a model a shuttle to show that it can actually work. In the medium term, we wanted to address some of the issues around narrow sidewalks. We wanted to widen the sidewalks, make it more pedestrian friendly, make the streets more humanized. Our precedent in this case at the top left is Ryerson University, where they closed off Gould Street between Yonge and Church. Now, we're not suggesting we close off a Kingston Road, but some of the elements from that can really apply here. They really add a lot of vibrancy to the Ryerson campus. So we could add some sort of vibrancy and livability to the Kingston Galloway area. As Susan pointed out earlier, from the transit perspective, there are 3 buses that run in the community. And there's sort of a triangle where some of the streets meet. That's Morningside, Lawrence, and Kingston Road. We're recommending putting a transit node there. So if you have to wait for a bus, you might as well make it a great place. Build up the parks there. There's apartments there, there's strip malls. Take some of the strip mall parking lots back, build it up as parkland, make a comfortable place. And maybe in the long term, look at maybe putting in some of the medical services, things like that, so that people are coming in there and able to access more things. We suggested a bike sharing network because it is difficult to get around and not everyone can afford to own a car. What about a bike sharing network? Now, we recognize that Bixby has a great program in Toronto. It may not be affordable in Kingston Galloway, but we'd maybe do a cooperative. And finally, we take our shuttle plan to the next step in the 2 to 5 year range. And we'd look at creating hubs at the Toronto community housing buildings. That way, the people that live there can be quite connected. Moving forward to the long term, we want to look at complete streets. We want to add segregated bike lanes. Again, going back to humanizing the intersections. One of our team members looked at the zoning for the area and found that it hadn't been updated in a number of years and that it was going to be really important to change the zoning to really reflect the community that's living there. We also looked at moving to the next step in the mobility hubs, where we have the Toronto Community Housing Hubs, and taking over the first floor of the building to do business hubs and incubators. And finally, to locate educational institutions in the area. Right now, the U of T has a satellite campus for their social work, but why not expand upon that? Or talk to Centennial College, who's also in the area. This would accomplish three things. It would educate people, it would provide jobs, and it would give more reason to bring more transportation into the area. So now I've gone over some of the interventions, and Susan's going to go over how, when you put it all together, how it all looks.
One of the things that I'm not sure that's clear, which I think I'm going to clarify now, is when our group started to work on this, in a way, it's not visionary. It's taking well-known principles of the public realm and transportation and actually doing them. And so what we decided to do was actually do this project for real, as opposed to go on theorizing about all the visionary things we could do here, because the need was so great that we felt there was no way that we couldn't just roll up our sleeves and get down and do this. So in all these strategies, there's strategies that are known. They're not things that people don't know. But here is what is now happening. Given the high concentration of social housing and the fact that the resident population who lives in that social housing make up the majority of people who have no access to transit or services, and personally having worked on the public realm in social housing projects for about 10 years, we formed an idea with a powerful plan to address the density of social housing and the lack of mobility. So we've combined our research for a model of privately run KGO mobility shuttle that we're working on, and working with the TCHC on public realm. So these are along Lawrence and Kingston Road, Morningside, the concentration of social housing, and this is the original proposed plan. We are in conversation with TCHC and the new CEO, who's very interested in working with us on how to best make use of the strategically located sites on East Scarborough to accomplish the private community shuttle. Because the TTC is not interested in supporting us because we don't have enough ridership statistically to support it. And we have to stay off their routes and off their shelters, so that we thought this is a perfect mix of the people who need transportation and the fact that TCHC is going to give us their ground floor to do the shuttles. Some will just be pick up and drop off, while others will be allocated as a transportation business incubator hub. And we see this as a very exciting dovetailing of vision and partnerships with residents, the community at large, business developments, and all interested stakeholders, where mobility is not just transportation, but a way to increase life's potential. And one of the first things we want to do is use real small-scale measures to get hubs going that are light on their feet. Use the authentic, real ma and pa people who might want to do like a small vegetable garden, bring out a picnic table, play an accordion. I mean, small things at first, but these things stimulate conversation about the possibility of bringing life to the street. I'm going to go through what these streets look like at the moment, so you can see what the 7-lane highways, vast parking lots look like. Any one of these complete streets are not new. Any one of the strategies will work. And one of the things that happens when you work with a community like this, they want to be in on every single design decision as part of community stakeholders. So what is not new is the attempt by most North American cities to actually implement their own version of this. Take, for example, just a small maneuver on Yonge Street by the Yonge Street BIA this summer. They've started to take back the street. Some of the parts might look a bit hokey or underdeveloped, but the intent is true and it's working. They've taken a lane off both sides of Yonge Street. And what it does is it jumpstarts the awareness of the poverty in our public realm when we overvalue the car. This is the heart of downtown KGO, in case you don't know it. They have, as I said, no historic buildings. It's all strip malls. And doing very small measures that would require no land use changes would immediately begin to support pedestrians and make available life on the street, which there isn't now. And to a more kind of standard, a standard kind of cross-section through a street of before and after, you can see the differences between the building edge and where a pedestrian is and all the vast parking lots that really, without any land use and just working with the landlords to redo their parking and free up more commercial opportunities for small businesses to start, everybody would benefit from that. So this is what we imagine, a busy, complete street. We want to take back the sidewalks, reduce the car as a priority. And this is one suburb, interestingly, where they don't have a car addiction because they don't have enough cars. So what is their tragic flaw of having very little cars will actually be a great asset because there'll be very little pushback about taking their car real estate away. Complete green streets, car share, bike share, new bike network with access to ravines, a shuttle hub that stops at 4 to 5 social housing locations with one starting up to the main hub. This is what we imagine, and Arlene is going to speak to the funding we've found to actually do this.
So how do we make this vision a reality? We found that many of the proposed solutions to reconnect Kingston Galloway could be actioned through partnerships, in-kind donations, grant and loan programs, along with municipal support and, of course, the support of the community. The East Scarborough storefront has a very large role to play in connecting the people and the grants. Now, of course, this is one of those charts that's going to be really hard to read everything, but just for the purposes of today, what we did was we took the short-term funding and then we divided up our solutions into solutions, actions, partners, and funding. So you can see sort of from a very high level, we've thought through the process. In the short term, a lot of the funding comes at the sort of local municipal level. So you're looking at the City of Toronto, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Toronto Community Fund for funding a lot of these things. And then we looked at sort of unique funding opportunities. Believe it or not, Allstate Insurance has a fund to help improve safety in neighborhoods. And of course, from the in-kind perspective, you've got Toronto Hydro's Light the Night program, which I believe has already started some work in Scarborough Village. From a medium-term perspective, this is where we'd really have to engage the city in more of the funding, but we'd hope in the 2 to 5 year plan, we'd have established more plans and some sort of more formalized plans in place. But through going through the city, we could access a number of Infrastructure Canada loans to help with the complete streets and to help with the development of the mobility hubs in Toronto community housing buildings. The Toronto Atmospheric Fund also has funding to help feasibility studies and startup programs. We were fortunate enough to have one of their members on our team who was able to inform us about this and let us know that this might be a good way to fund some of the startup for the shuttle service. And then of course, because a number of our suggestions involve green sustainable transportation, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a green municipal fund that can be accessed. And in the long-term funding sort of options, again, we're sticking with FCM and the infrastructure funds, but we're really relying heavily on partnerships. And that really is a lot of what our model's about and why we think it's fairly feasible. Now, since we actually did the charrette, we've actually worked with the East Scarborough storefront to review our ideas and to see what was feasible. And they gave us some really good feedback. And an interesting thing that happened there was that some of the ideas we proposed, they had already thought about or were starting to put into action. So we knew that these were feasible. So that's been great, and we've had the opportunity to work with them on developing their shuttle plan. In the meantime, there's also some really great updates that have happened in the community. So you can see from this picture that there's a fence coming down. What's happened is the tower renewal project got some extra funding, and part of that overall project included taking down the fences between the storefront and some of the towers around it. The next step is going to be doing some landscaping, so it's really going to open up that area. The Center for City Ecology has done a mapping project, and the idea being that it'll allow the community to envision what they want for the future. And finally, fingers crossed, the City Councilor has put together a motion to Council to approve a shuttle bus. So we're hoping that this will come true, and if not, we've got our plan to fall back on, and we're hoping to continue our work with them. Just as a final note, before we actually did this presentation, we thought we would work to try to engage some other stakeholders. And so we met with Toronto Community Housing, as Susan has mentioned, and a very positive response. and also civic action. So we're hoping to keep them engaged throughout this process.
The streets of KGO were planned for a very different demographic with old-fashioned approach to community building. It's sadly out of step with today's priorities of good, responsible land use and planning practice. We're committed to working on this project in real time of balancing economic and social issues and a stewardship of the land for future generations. And as Adam Gimbroni said, this is a jewel of an inner city suburb. Let's not miss the amazing opportunities presented by nature, little car reliance, social housing interest in supporting their residents with shuttle stops, and every resident, immigrant or not, wanting to progress in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, from my perspective, that that I love the idea of repurposing strip mall parking lots as pop-up stores and all of that, and I think that's a fabulous idea. And later, I'm interested in hearing a bit more about how people in the community have responded, because I think it's fascinating that you've started working to implement these things and work with the storefront. But as you mentioned, the local residents are not necessarily, say, in favor of Transit City or whatever. So I'm interested to know how these things translate from the drawing board to community reaction. So.
Yeah, this was very different from what we heard, and I've never been there, so I go visit. What you said about, you mentioned something like food or go, and that those decisions made, that's different from the $4 billion savings account we heard in Vaughan, but it's the reality. And part of the question I had earlier was, it's great to create new hubs, but these are the neighborhoods we have today. How do we make sure we bring them along as opposed to grow the divide? Ultimately, I have only one question, that is if Luigi's robotic furniture will follow us all the way there.
We'll take it. Yeah.
You'll take it, yeah.
And the shared skis.
And yeah. No, I thought it was very interesting because as you said, it's a real situation. It's real there. There's no $10 billion 30-year plan to do this. Hopefully, maybe one day. But it's about the people that live there and that want to probably have a different or a better or a more connected or integrated life, and that with simple programs almost, you make such a big difference. And I think with that, and we talked about culture and change in terms of behavior of people, you probably start to really do this from the inside out and get people to change their behavior and change their approach into living in these communities, which I would suspect will only drive more of that same behavior and probably draw in more activity into the community as well. So we call that, I guess, the human networks, because it is about connecting the dots between the people and the businesses and the associations that are there. The thing that I saw missing, although you talked a lot about partnerships, I always look at if our name is there because that means people come and ask for money, but it wasn't, and there was no real private sector companies listed as in terms of helping to rejuvenate neighborhoods like this. So I was wondering if that's done by design, or if you feel private sector company would never come to these areas and try to help. But I suspect that there is other funding available, and not just funding, but also, as we talked earlier about, maybe the opportunity to generate innovation or trigger innovation and creativity in terms of getting businesses and to go and start there. And then the last, you mentioned the university very quickly, and then when we look at connected communities, it seems to be those communities where there is a reasonably strong presence of an academic institution. There seemed to be a very natural draw to accelerate things and get things done. And I know you briefly talked about them, but I wonder how integrated they would be to really kind of accelerate the developments here.
Okay, this is the real challenge. This is, I was talking about, there's what you do with existing neighbourhoods and what you do with whole brownfield sites. This is the real challenge. And what I think was really interesting is that this is an example of where density isn't everything. You know, people talk about we need to have density, we need to have more greater density. Without the transit connections, without the other mixed-use things that you would get in a hub, you don't get that mix, so you don't get the opportunities that are able to be made. I thought, from a transportation perspective, this is a really good example of access. And it's not just transportation access, and it's understanding what the community needs and getting access to the basics to be able to build the community. So getting people knowing what the health opportunities are, where they can go for support, all those sorts of education facilities. It's giving people access to opportunities. And I can imagine actually that a lot of those opportunities are within a walking distance or cycling distance, and so you've got real opportunities for the for active transportation within this. And then where people are actually moving out of the community might well be for work, and so it's what are the types of work, and whether you can get shuttle buses not only going within the community, which might well be well served by a shuttle, but also active transportation. Whether you can get a shuttle which would take you to maybe the downtown, which is perhaps run by volunteers. And then the other thing that occurred to me is, how much time do people actually have to volunteer here? Is this, are people working, when David Miller was talking about Transit City and the social cohesion that would give, he was talking about people who make transit journeys of 2 hours each way to go and work in minimum wage jobs, and it's that equity. But the decision makers are never the people who are going to say, well, that's a reason to put money into this area or give it rapid transit. Because I don't actually think that rapid transit necessarily regenerates a community, and it's not necessarily what the community needs. It's good, reliable transit, bus-based usually, and that will actually connect people where they want to go, and then volunteer services that were like van shares or whatever, where people can get to early morning shifts in the downtown. So where am I going? I should have a question here somewhere. I thought what was really interesting is the money side of things, and the benefits that you get from giving the decision making to the people. So you give perhaps grants, or there's money available, a pot of money available that people bid for, and they come up or compete with good ideas of what that money goes to. But it's actually the community coming together to decide what's important for them, and whether it's access to, it might help people to be able to go on those long transit trips if there was more childcare available, and that was where the money went to. Often when it's about transportation problems, it's not actually the money that needs to be spent on transportation, it's often a total mix of all sorts of things. So access is such an all-encompassing word, and it's not just about transportation. That's what's my concluding piece.
Great. I actually found there to be some similarities between the two completely different projects, where the first one we had a site in isolation with a blank slate, and this is a site in isolation with a pre-existing development and problems to deal with. Again, though, with a lot of opportunity. Having a lot of high-rise buildings, you already have those pre-existing communities. TCHCs tends to already have community within those buildings, ways to communicate with large groups of people that might sit on boards and committees that know what's going on. So I guess that's part of where you get a lot of the volunteers and to be able to organize that. Another really neat thing that I liked was the idea of trying to improve proximity, as opposed to thinking about how to get people faster somewhere else. I think we try to think about how everyone gets into Toronto or out of Toronto, as opposed to thinking about what they can do within the space you already have. So that was something really good. More comment. I know you mentioned about adding employment through educational institutions as well as other institutions. Part of my question will go towards thinking about what types of employment does this demographic look for or have access to. So they might use the resources for developing education, but what about those who maybe don't have that skill or education? What types of employment opportunities can they have within the area? Because we know that tends to be a problem with lower income groups, the types of employment they need are not necessarily where they live. So yeah, good job.
Well, again, congratulations on, I think, a terrific concept, and I love the fact that you worked directly with the people in the community who are already showing leadership. I've got 3 completely different points to make. The first one is, I actually think your concept is transferable to all sorts of isolated suburban communities, no matter what their income level is. And in fact, the advantage of this community in implementing what you've put forward is that there's already that mobilization of the community to address critical issues in neighborhoods and communities that are just as isolated, except maybe people do drive cars, but there may not be that crisis that motivates them to pull together and actually do something about some of the problems in their community. But I think that a number of the concepts of providing the, looking at proximity and local access and all that are, and taking back some of that private public space that's underutilized are transferable into a lot of different settings. The second thing has to do with institutions and change, and coming from an institution representing here today, you can't always look to institutions to lead, and sometimes the community has to lead the institutions. I really encourage you and the community to pursue that shuttle concept, but to not give up on getting it connected back in. And it sounds like perhaps the local councillor might be one of those venues for helping make that happen. The word pilot is a wonderful word sometimes because it can hook you in to start to demonstrate the strengths and to learn what some of the weaknesses are or where you shouldn't oversell, but you might get some surprising results. And what I would say is, make sure you don't fall, and that the community doesn't fall into the same mistakes that institutions make, and that is plan the shuttle in a silo, as though it's the only thing going on. Make sure it connects. Make sure it connects with what connects. Even if you're not getting the cooperation, if it's there, the customers will demand it, and going with the transit user groups, I think, is a great idea, because transit organizations will listen to their groups of customers. It's, you know, we get a lot of individuals express ideas, and they come from a lot of different areas, but when you get a group of people with a common cause who are passengers and are customers of the systems, I think that it's, that has a lot more power in terms of generating change for the future. The third thing I wanted to focus on is the notion of the hub, which I think is a really powerful concept here. And I love the way you layered it with, there's the transportation aspect of the hub, which is kind of maybe from the transportation side, what we're, and certainly from Metrolinx, what we're used to thinking about, but layering up, thinking of it locally in terms of how you can get, use some of, like that triangle that you talked about, and trying to draw all sorts of activity there, whether it be businesses or I'm assuming local institutions, local services, maybe even the businesses that are in the strip mall there. They may actually go, gee, if that's where the people are, maybe I should participate in that. I think that notion of the hub is a great idea, and could evolve someday into what people understand to be the center of their community. And it sounds like there's a great start to that. So thank you.
Well, I wanted to start that, and with the banking notion of the private investment. We have been looking into private investment. We've looked at all the banks in the area, and there's a huge philanthropic fund of about $2.8 million that we've looked at. Part of our issue is figuring out how to pitch this to who and when without stepping on toes. So some people we pitch to, it's not sophisticated enough. Other people feel like we're running away with the ball and not like including them. So it's a very careful maneuvering, and I think once we have a certain number of institutional partners and the community on board, then we will probably investigate the banking situation and other private developers as well, because I think there's business to be made here, and if people are not going to Mississauga on a 3-hour trek, but are working in a context with their own authentic skills, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
And I wanted to talk to the ability to replicate this. I think, you know, it's hard in 20 minutes to really try to compress all the things you're thinking about. But as I mentioned, when I was talking about the East Scarborough storefront and it being a hub, and then it's been replicated in a number of communities because of its success, I think, you know, I think it's possible to replicate the whole plan. And you know, like you said, not just in the priority neighborhoods, but other places. But I think for priority neighborhoods, there's a real opportunity there to replicate this. We were amazed, actually, when we went to the East Scarborough storefront and we presented our ideas. They're like, yep, check, done it, check. And they're so integrated in the community, and their access to grants. They're like, well, yeah, we could get some startup funding for a shuttle, but we need operating funding. So, you know, it was trying to think about those sorts of things, but it's incredibly powerful. And I think we're on the right track with some of these hubs to maybe making this more of a reality throughout Toronto.
I'm not quite sure who I want to respond to about this. I think it was the connection back to Toronto. Originally, we were supposed to connect the KGO to Toronto. And when we looked at what was there, we thought, you know, we have to connect it to itself first. This is the first major priority. And actually, as we've spoken to people in the area, including Mitzi Hunter, who was at TCAC and who's now at Civic Action, she said, really, East is better. I mean, there's a lot of smaller towns with a lot of services that would be willing to have a kind of connection to the KGO that Toronto wouldn't. So it's like a big investigation of the whole area, as well as all the institutions and the banks, and it is an all-in process. And one of the really interesting things is, you know, trying to pitch this in a way. I mean, there's an architect that presented to us who works with Scarborough Centre quite a bit, and his design was entirely committee by design, designed by committee. And I talked to him about that afterwards, because I do think that architects and designers do have a role where you actually teach and you actually help people make better decisions. It's not just kind of all in orange and purple and whatever color, you know, everybody votes on. I think there is an educational component. And so it is a slippery slope, but it's actually a really exciting one to be able to work with people and actually try and educate them at the same time as working together. They're educating you, you're educating them, all in. So.
Sorry, one final thing. When we were talking about the concepts of creating our own sort of connected community, one of the inspirations I shared with my team was through my day job. We're actually currently working with a group in the east side of London. For those that know London, Ontario, if you're east of Adelaide, it's kind of the area actually is quite nice. But this was sort of almost like an isolated community within London. And this community has sort of built up its own steam, got a really proactive BIA, and they developed a lot of businesses in their area. And so that was some of our inspiration for this, because they've really done a great job, and they've almost created their own sort of micro community. So.
We were talking earlier about one of the strengths of the concept of the previous group was drawing on the skills and the creativity of the community that's there, and that being from a suburban community myself and connected into the arts community there, I know how much creativity and talent that there is, and that often the building form gets in the way of connecting those people. And so, again, I think drawing on the talents of the local area here is another key to the success of this concept as well.
Answer that for 1 second. Actually, a lot of Toronto Community Housing Corporations might have 5,000 people in it, which is bigger than a lot of towns that have banks and main streets and bakeries and daycares and high schools. But in these buildings of cities of people from all over the world, there are incredible talents. And when you give them an opportunity of space on the ground floor, which I've done on numerous occasions, they open their own Goodwills, they open their own cafes, and they create their own business hubs that are extremely authentic and that people are happy to participate in. And so that's really the inspiration to I don't know what question I'm answering, but anyway, that's a huge inspiration.